The opening line of a novel is possibly one of the most important aspects of a novel, because it is the first impression of the book that the reader will have, giving them the first taste of what is to come, and establishing the theme for the rest of the story. Although it may seem an impossible feat to accomplish in just one sentence, many authors have done so brilliantly and intelligently, and it is some of those great first lines that I want to break down today and talk about just what makes them great in the first place. Opening lines have the difficult job of both drawing the reader into a point that they can't help but continue, and establishing as much information as possible. The two jobs seem contrary in nature. How does one dump as much exposition as possible into a few words, and also entertain someone enough to keep reading? This is where the genius and careful craft of authors come into play. Listen to Stephen King, who has been known to spend weeks or even years on a first line when he says, "It's not just the reader's way in, it's the writer's way in also, and you've got to find a doorway that fits us both." I think that's why my books tend to begin as first sentences. I'll write that opening sentence first, and when I get it right, I'll start to think I really have something. First sentences for Stephen King and many other authors aren't just a good way to get the reader engaged in the story. They are the entire foundation upon which the story is built. If the first sentence doesn't sit right with the reader, or the writer for that matter, the entire novel is in danger of falling apart. That's not to say that the entire story rests on a great first line. If your story is garbage but your first line is a masterpiece, that's not going to hold up either. But first lines are important, in that they can provide all the context for setting and even characters that would be stilted and forced in any other way. Let's take a look at two incredibly simple first lines and break them down to discuss what makes them either good or bad. To start, one of the most famous first lines of all time, from Moby Dick. "Call me Ishmael." You may be thinking, how do these three words which have nothing to do with whales or boats or crazy sailors establish anything to the plot at hand? In truth, the opening line of Moby Dick is brilliantly complex. The tone of the line is casual, inviting. It wants you to lean in and listen to what is to come next. It establishes Ishmael as the narrator of the story and places you alongside him, letting you know that you won't be experiencing this story from the point of view of an omnipotent movie camera. Instead, you will be seated alongside Ishmael as he weaves his tale. And that's another thing. How do we know his name is Ishmael in the first place? He specifically says, "Call me Ishmael," which would lead you to believe that he is either extending a friendly handshake or being deceptive for an ulterior motive. Either way, this ambiguity is a major theme of Moby Dick, a narrator that is telling us this tale personally and may or may not be telling the truth. Either way, we know it'll be an adventure. Now let's break down the first lines of one of the most poorly written novels of the 21st century, 50 Shades of Grey. Here it goes. "I scowl with frustration at myself in the mirror." Your first thought may be, hey, that's not so bad. I mean, we know that this person has confidence issues, right? Or maybe they're just having a bad hair day, or maybe it's Halloween and they're wearing a costume? Maybe they're trying to learn how to braid their own hair? Okay, so it doesn't tell us as much as we'd like it to, but ambiguity is a good thing, right? We just talked about Moby Dick and how ambiguity sets up a major theme, and that would be perfect if ambiguity or unreliable narrators were in any way a part of 50 Shades of Grey, but they aren't. And in terms of general flow, try just saying this line out loud. Really say it. "I scowl with frustration at myself in the mirror." Doesn't exactly flow off the tongue, does it? Wouldn't it be much simpler just to say, "I scowl at myself in the mirror"? Doesn't scowling imply frustration in the first place? It's a bulky sentence that carries an awkward load and doesn't lend much, if anything, to the story as a whole. Before I go, let's break down one more opening line. Because this video is something of a metaphorical bridge between my old audiobook content and my new content, I'm going to talk about The Catcher in the Rye. You all know it's my favorite, I just couldn't resist. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me, and all that David Copperfield kind of crap, but I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. This line delivers a major punch to the reader and exposes them to the entire novel to come. We can tell right away that the story will be told in first person, that the narrator is extremely aware of the reader. Like in Moby Dick, this familiarity with the reader will be a very important mechanic of the novel. We also know that the narrator is snarky, possibly even sarcastic, and cynical in general. His attitude toward traditional storytelling lets us know that this probably isn't our average story, or at least not our average narrator. Besides the tone of the first sentence, what do the words themselves tell us about the story? We know that he might not have had the best childhood, or as he describes it, David Copperfield kind of crap, and that his relationship with his parents is distant at best. Most importantly, though, are the first few words, "if you really want to hear about it." This hints at some major event that is going to take place, and that the narrator is reluctant to tell us about it. Maybe because it's too horrible, maybe because it causes too much emotional pain to bring up, or maybe because he's just tired of telling the story to so many people. We'll have to keep reading to find out exactly what it is. Opening lines are crucial to story, image, and tone, but don't get too caught up in them. Yes, I just told you that Stephen King takes years to figure his out, but let Mr. King remind you that you can't create a writing career based on first lines. A book won't stand or fall on the very first line of prose. The story's gotta be there, and that's the real work. And yet a really good first line can do so much to establish that crucial sense of voice. It's the first thing that acquaints you, that makes you eager, that starts to enlist you for the long haul. So there's incredible power in it. When you say, "Come in here, you want to know about this," and someone begins to listen. My name is Ethan, and this has been Whiteboard Novels.